A judge was interviewing a woman regarding her pending divorce and asked, "What are the grounds for your divorce?" She replied, "About 4 acres and a nice little home in the middle of the property with a stream running by." "No," he said. "I mean, what is the foundation of this case?" "It is made of concrete, brick, and mortar, Your Honor," she responded. "I mean," he continued, "what are your relations like? I have an aunt and uncle living here in town, and so do my husband's parents," he said. "Do you have a real grudge?" "No," she replied. "We have a 2-car carport and have never really needed one." "Please," he tried again. "Is there any infidelity in your marriage?" "Yes, both my son and daughter have stereo sets. We don't necessarily like the music, but the answer to your questions is yes." "Ma'am, does your husband ever beat you up?" "Yes," she responded. "About twice a week he gets up earlier than I do." Finally, in frustration, the judge asked, "Lady, why do you want a divorce?" "Oh, I don't want a divorce," she replied. "I've never wanted a divorce. My husband does. He says he just can't communicate with me." Do you know how to catch a bear? Well, first you have to dig a deep hole in the woods and fill it half full of ashes from the fireplace. Then place peas all around the outside of the hole. Finally, you hide in some nearby bushes and wait for a bear to come by. When a bear comes to take a pea, you kick him in the ash hole. As told to me by my dad at dinner, every single time peas were served. Miss you, Dad? An old woman was sitting in her rocker by the fireplace one night when, all of a sudden, a genie appeared and promised to grant one wish. She thought about it for quite a while, then, looking down at her faithful cat Tom, she asked the genie to transform the pet into a handsome prince who would love her forever. With a wave of his wand, the genie did as he was asked, leaving the old lady and the prince to become better acquainted. Some time passed, and the old woman began making amorous advances toward the handsome young man, who had only minutes before been seated at her feet. As she reached out to pull him toward her, the prince leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Now aren't you sorry you had me fixed?" A biker stops by the local Harley-Davidson shop to have his bike repaired. They couldn't fix it while he waited, so he said he didn't live far and would just walk home. On the way home, he stopped at the hardware store and bought a bucket and an anvil. He stopped by the farm store and picked up a couple of chickens and a goose. However, struggling outside the store, he now had a problem: how to carry all of his purchases home. While he was scratching his head, he was approached by a little old lady who told him she was lost. She asked, "Can you tell me how to get to 1603 Mockingbird Lane?" The biker said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I live at 1616 Mockingbird Lane. I would walk you home, but I can't carry this lot." The old lady suggested, "Why don't you put the anvil in the bucket, carry the bucket in one hand, put a chicken under each arm, and hold the goose in your other hand?" "Why, thank you very much," he said, and he proceeded to walk the old girl home. On the way, he says, "Let's take my shortcut and go down this alley. We'll be there in no time." The little old lady looked him over cautiously and said, "I am a lonely widow without a husband to defend me. How do I know that when we get in the alley, you won't hold me up against the wall, pull up my skirt, and have your way with me?" The biker said, "Holy smokes, lady! I am carrying a bucket, an anvil, a goose, and 2 chickens. How in the world could I possibly hold you up against the wall and do that?" The lady replied, "Set the goose down, cover him with the bucket, put the anvil on top of the bucket, and I'll hold the chickens." A teenager rolled up to the Mexican border on a bike. He had a sack of sand in his hand. "What's in the sack?" asked the border patrol officer. "Just sand," said the kid. The officer didn't believe him, so he opened the sack to find just sand. The officer dumped the sack empty and dug through it, but he only saw sand. He even took a sample to a lab to have it tested, but all signs showed it was pure sand. Reluctantly, the officer let the kid go. The next day, The same kid rolled up on his bike to the Mexican border with another sack in his hand. Again, the officer asked what was in the bag. He searched through the bag and once again had the sack tested for its contents, but it was just sand. The officer had no choice but to let the kid leave again. This went on for years. The officer was sure that one day the kid would have something else in the sack, and eventually, he drove himself to insanity. He was fired, and he became a heavy drinker. One day, he was at the bar when the teenager, who had been crossing the border every day with a sack of sand, sat down next to him. The ex-border patrol officer looked at him and pleaded, "Look, all those times you were crossing the border, I knew you were smuggling something. Please just tell me what it was and give me some peace of mind. I don't even work as a cop anymore," the kid said. A young man buys a brand new bike. He is over the moon with his purchase. The salesman hands him a tiny jar of Vaseline before driving off, remarking, "Beware that your seat is made of 100% pure bison leather. Make sure to put Vaseline on the seat should it rain, otherwise the leather might crack." The man thanks the salesman and rides off on his new best friend. After 300 kilometers of touring fun, his bike begins to stutter and eventually breaks down. The man finds himself in the middle of nowhere and walks to the nearest farm. The farmer, who is working outside on the land, greets him and asks if he stays for dinner, awaiting the truck that'll pick up his bike for reparation. Eagerly, the man agrees. Inside, he meets the farmer's wife and their beautiful daughter. When he walks into the kitchen, he's astounded by the biggest pile of dirty dishes he's ever seen. "We have one dinner rule," the farmer says. "Whoever speaks during dinner has to do the dishes." Dinner is served, and everyone is enjoying the meal in total silence. When the dessert comes, the farmer's daughter takes off her top and starts frisking the man. In about 2 minutes, they are making love right there on the table. Nobody utters a word. After they finish, the farmer's wife gets under the table and blows the man like he's never been blown before. Right after, she climbs on his lap and rides him like a bull. Still, nobody has said a word. When she's done, the man lights a cigarette and peeks out of the window. He notices it started drizzling outside and remembers his bike is out in the open. He jolts up, grabs the Vaseline, and bolts to the front door, only to find it locked. He sprints back into the kitchen, making wild arm gestures to the farmer, pointing outside, to the door, and to his tiny jar of Vaseline. The farmer, white with fear, then says, all right, I'll do the dishes."